it's okay.
Okay, great.
Hi, Yacek.
Hello.
Good to hear you.
Hi.
Okay, good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening to everybody that entered the Zoom. Good evening to everyone. Welcome. We are happy to see you here. I'm excited to open the second event of the second day of the Poetry Place International Festival, the fourth, with the Poland poet Jacek Dehnel, hosted by Hanna Herzig. I'm Netzer Lau, the artist-producer of Poetry Place and Festival. Here with us, the poet Noah Shakarji and Gilad Meiri, the directors of Poetry Place. I'm honored to introduce Dr. Hanna Herzig. Dr. Herzig is a literary researcher, literary critic, and translator. She was born in displaced persons camp in Germany to Holocaust survivor parents from Poland and lives in Tel Aviv today. Dr. Herzig deals with Israeli fiction and theory of literature. In 1988, she was awarded the Bernstein Prize for Literary Criticism. In the field of translation, she previously translated works of fiction and literary theory from English, and she began to translate Polish literature, the mother tongue she returned to in recent years. After getting acquainted with the poetry of Jacek Dehnel, she prepared a collection of his poetry published over the course of 20 years. The book, All the Distant Cities, and in Hebrew, Kol Ha'arim Harechokot, was recently published by קשב לשירה. Hanna will host this event, and she will shortly present Mr. Dehnel, but first some technical issues. Your microphone will be muted during the event, but we will dedicate the last 10 minutes or so to your questions. You may write them in the chat box during the event. Now, I pass the mic to Hanna and wish you all a pleasant event.
So, good evening to you all. First, I want to thank the organizers of the festival at מקום לשירה for inviting me, and especially Netzer, who was so helpful. Many thanks to Rafi Weichart, who is here, I see, the well-known translator of Polish poetry. He's the editor of קשב לשירה, where my book of translation was published a few months ago. You can see it. Can you?
Not yet.
Can you see it? Can you see the book?
Close.
Okay. But now I don't see everybody what's okay. It is a collection of poems written over 20 years and the first translation into ebook of the poetry of Jacek Dehnel. In fact, I started translating the Polish poetry at all, or poetry at all, when I came across one of Jacek's poems, and I was enchanted immediately, as you know. So Jacek, I'm glad to see you after all these years, you know. It took quite a long years when, you know, this translation was gradually progressing. And how are you these days?
Good, thank you. Actually, I will bring a better camera. Just a second. No, I will not bring it because I think my husband took it with him. So, oh no, I have it here. Okay, lovely. So you will see me in
not so many.
Less precise, more precise, but older because of all the signs of my aging. Okay, so thank you. I'm fine. Actually, it's an important period recently in my life because I have finished a number of large projects, especially a very, very large non-fiction book that I was working on for 4 years. It's my first non-fiction book, so I'm very impatient to see it in print, but it's only in autumn because editing will take a lot of time because it's a very, very big piece. It's like 1.7 million characters. It's really huge. It's like 1,000 pages or something like that. So now I'm resting after that, just doing like some small jobs, writing little pieces, but not a big one, not a big thing. And poetry-wise, recently, as Hanna knows, another book of my poems was published in wydawnictwo A5, publishing house from Kraków, run by Mr. and Mrs. Krynicki, and she's a great publisher and he's a great poet, really worth reading. But I think his books were translated already into Hebrew, so you can check Ryszard Krynicki because he's a great writer. And I was lucky enough to be published in their publishing house, which is small, very prestigious press. And Ruma, this is the new title of the new book.
Can you tell us a few words? What kind of book is it?
It's a book of poems. It's a book of poems. It was published last.
Bruma, I know.
Bruma, yeah. It was published in October.
The new book you just.
Well, it's relatively new. It's just a few months. So
no,
it's my newest book.
Your non-fiction book.
Oh, my new non-fiction book. It is a family history of my cousins, who sort of met my grandmother's sister married into that family. And this is like a saga of an old Warsaw family, very rich, who made huge money on Russian imperial lottery, and then had a factory and a hotel, and they've lost all of that because of first the Second World War and then the communists who took their properties. And so they started to deal with art, and they were part of a huge scandal, a huge affair in 1970s when the communist government was prosecuting a legal case against a gang of smugglers, and they were part of that group. So this is a very complex storytelling, the story of Poland before the war, during the war, and after the war, and how complex the communist society was and how different powers acted there.
So good luck with your new book.
Thank you.
And I'll introduce you shortly now. Jacek Dehnel is a poet, a writer, translator, and a painter. He was born in 1980 in Begdנסק. Until recently, he lived in Warsaw, but due to the growing homophobia in Poland, he moved to Berlin in 2020, where he lives with his partner, פיוטר טארצ'ינסקי. Dehnel published 10 volumes of poetry and more than 20 books of prose in different styles and genres, from the realistic historical novel about his grandmother, Lala, which was translated into many languages, between them into Hebrew, and experimental texts following Balzac and Thomas Bernard and so on. His poems and prose fiction have been translated in about 20 languages. He also edited collections of poetry and essays, published a book with side-by-side photographs and text, participated in writing the script of the illustrated film Loving Vincent about Van Gogh, and more. Recently, he is writing a series of detective novels together with his partner. Dehnel translates English poetry and prose into Polish, among others Philip Larkin, W.H. Auden, Edmund White, Scott Fitzgerald, Henry James, and James Coetzee. In addition to his literary activities, he is a well-known public figure in Poland. He publishes in magazines and journals. He often appears in the media and is known as a harsh critic of the right-wing regime and the conservative and nationalistic values in Polish society. He is a key activist in the LGBT movement in Poland and a provocative critic of the church and its homophobic conduct. Dehnel won the Kościelski Prize, the Passport Politica Prize, and was nominated for many others. So, we'll start by reading one of your impressive poems, which Jacek wrote on 2005 when he was only 25. The poem is written as a reflection on two portraits of the gay artist of photography, Robert Mapplethorpe. The first by Andy Warhol as a young man and beautiful, as a young and beautiful man. The second is the famous self-portrait with a cane and a skull, shortly before Mapplethorpe died of AIDS. In Hebrew, it's called מה קרה לך ילד, and Jacek, please start by reading.
Andy Warhol, Robert Mapplethorpe. Co ci się stało, dziecko? Powiedz, co się stało. Którędy w ciebie weszło to straszne, którędy? Jakimi cieśninami wpłynęły nieszczelne tankowce z takim czarnym? Z jakiej chmury spadły gorzkie deszcze? Czy owoc był szkodliwy? Czy ten arszenik był zatruty? Co łykałeś, dziecko? To zobaczyłeś, dziecko, jakie frakcje ropy, jakie złoża bazaltu, jakie hałdy żużlu. Czy ten pan cię dotykał? Czy go dotykałeś? Co tak ciebie dotknęło? Czy było dotkliwe to miasto i ci ludzie? Skąd ta zmiana, dziecko? Kto ci dał ten cukierek? Kto ci wsunął w rękę tę tabletkę? Kto wsączył ci ten jad, tę chudość, tę matowość, tę gorycz? Co dostałeś w zamian? Straciłeś czy zyskałeś? Co ci przetoczono? Przez jakie zadrapania, czyje ugryzienia weszło to w ciebie? Kiedy? I czemu nie chciało wyjść? I czemu nie zechce wyjść? Dlaczego czarno, skoro było tak biało? Czy ktoś urodzony w Queens mógł skończyć inaczej? Czy weszło z migawką przez przesłonę i kto mu otworzył drogę, kto mu otworzył to, co się otwiera? Czy było inne wyjście, inne niż to wejście, którym weszło do środka? Co było pod spodem, kiedy szedłeś po wierzchu? I co jest pod spodem, kiedy tak jesteś w środku, gdy wszedłeś do środka?
Okay, now I will read it in Hebrew. מה קרה לך ילד? אנדי וורהול, רוברט מייפלטורפ, 1973, רוברט מייפלטורפ, דיוקן עצמי עם מקל בגולגולת, 1988. מה קרה לך ילד? אמור, מה קרה? מאין נכנסה בך הזוועה הזאת? מאין? דרך אילו נקיקים שטו המחליות המנוקבות עם הסען השחור הכבד? איזה ענן המטיר את הגשמים המררים? האם הפרי היה מקולקל? האם הזרניך היה מורעל? מה בלט הילד? מה ראית ילד? אילו גושי נפט גולמי? אילו מצבורי בזלת? אילו ערימות פסולת פחם? האם האדון הוא נגע בך? האם נגעת בו? מה נגע בך ביד כל כך קשה? האם הכאיב לך מגעה של העיר הזאת, של האנשים האלה? איך התחולל השינוי הזה, ילד? מי נתן לך את הסוכריה? מי דחף לך ליד את הגלולה הזאת? מי נסח לתוכך את הארס הזה, את הרזון, את הקהות, את קובעת המרורים? מה קיבלת בתמורה? האם הפסדת או הרווחת? מה הערו אל קרבך? מחמת אילו שריטות, בגלל נשיכותיו של מי נכנס הדבר הזה אל תוכך? מתי? ולמה זה אחז בך? למה זה אוחז בך, מסרב לצאת? למה השחור הזה, והרי היה שם רק לובן? האם מישהו שנולד בקווינס אפשר שיהיה לו סוף אחר? האם הדבר הזה חדר עם כניסת האור, בהבזק מצלמה, עם פתיחת הצמצם? ומי זה שאפשר לו? מי זה שסלל לפניו את הדרך? והאם היה פתח יציאה אחר? אחר מהפתח דרכו נכנס פנימה? מה היה מתחת לפני השטח כאשר אתה הלכת מעל? ומה יש מתחת עכשיו כשנכנסת פנימה, עכשיו כשאתה כולך בפנים? Jacek, this powerful poem is about the fate of those who are doomed to decline, about black and white, contamination and pureness. It introduces the theme of death, which is prominent in your poetry. Can you tell us what it meant to you when you wrote it in such an early age?
I guess it is partially about being gay. So if you are a gay person in my generation in Poland, you basically had no no textbook for being gay. So we did not have literary or any other public figures who came out really in 1990s. We did not have LGBT figures in art, literature. Even if there was something, it was something like Oscar Wilde or Rimbaud or even Iwaszkiewicz. So there are books from 19th century or 1950s, you know, or 1930s. It's something like, you know, your basically great grandparents, not too sexy. And in order to that, you had to invent some kind of, I would say, genealogy. Like genealogy that does not deal with your family, but with your sort of tribe of LGBT people. And among that, of course, my previous generation in this genealogy is the generation of people who died of AIDS largely. So obviously this whole shock of the AIDS epidemic is very present in the gay subculture, especially gay, not necessarily all the LGBT people, but especially in gay culture, because the victims of that were largely gay men. And Robert Mapplethorpe, of course, with this iconic image, but also with his art, which was very closely connected to the New York art scene, but also New York sex scene, and quite obscene sex scene, and is a very daring sexual exploits, is of course an important and striking figure. And for me, who was 25 years old, it was sort of, you know, on one hand, very attractive, the liberty and the boldness of Mapplethorpe's art and the way he sort of openly spoke about his sexuality. But at the same time, it has this very heavy burden of death and illness. So I guess that was this striking point for me, that you see those two images, this beautiful Mapplethorpe, who's, I don't know, 20, 21, on this Andy Warhol's Polaroid print. Actually, it was in a book, it's a very expensive book with photos by Andy Warhol, and I've seen it only in a bookstore. I could not afford the book, and that was not the time when you could just take a camera from your pocket, because it's on everyone's smartphone. So I just had it in my memory. I knew the Mapplethorpe's self-portrait, but this one photo I had seen just once in the bookstore. And then the book was sold, so I could not go and see it anymore. So basically, I haven't seen that photo since I wrote that poem.
Oh. We had an exposition in Israel 20 years ago, maybe.
Well, I just still have it in my mind, so it's fine.
Yeah, I remember it. Now we'll go to a little bit to the context of Polish poetry. Polish poetry is very well known and loved in Israel, yet we have only few translations of the younger generations. In fact, you are the first of the contemporary generation who is translated into Hebrew. The Israeli critic Shira Stav sees your poetics as opposed to Szymborska's. She wrote that while in the poetry of Szymborska, ideology precedes being, in yours the ideas and abstractions grow organically from the tangible and the material reality. What do you think about this observation?
Well, I wouldn't position myself sort of against Szymborska. I respect her very much as a poet. And we have those four poets whom we call the dinosaurs, or that's how they were called, let's say 10 or 15 years ago. So it was Herbert, Miłosz, Szymborska, and Różewicz. They all died since, but they were the huge figures looming over Polish poetry. And of course, extremely important to Polish poetry and to poetry in general. Two of them got Nobel Prizes, Miłosz and Szymborska. And I respect her, and I also published a selection as an editor, a selection of her texts about books. It is interesting for me how Szymborska is perceived from outside by this critic, because in Poland generally, it was rather seen that after a brief flirt with communism in her youth, she was very reluctant to go into any kind of ideology. So when Miłosz and especially Herbert were very much into politics and very much into peddling their ideas about the society, about politics, etc., she was just sort of ironic, standing back, writing about things which are not necessarily connected to politics or ideologies. But I guess it might be how we perceive it from inside of the Polish literature, and from outside she could be seen completely different. There was a huge movement of poets after 1989 who sort of did not want to write about politics and about Poland and Polishness, and they just wanted to write about everyday life, about sex, about feelings, and not about the important things as it was before the fall of communism. And there was just whole generation, so-called Brilliant poetry from the magazine that was published, and they were figured in that magazine. So Martin Świetlicki, Jacek Dehnel, and many others. And they were very much against those dinosaurs. Whereas I'm a generation younger from them, and I'm fine with those poets. Although I don't write like them, of course, because I come from different situations, from different experiences, etc.
I agree with her what she wrote. You are not telling about something. You are not writing to make us clever, to say clever things. You just show them physically, as sensually. You build them. You're not talking about, you're showing it. It's not ideology in the sense of ideology in Szymborska. It's like saying smart things, saying, you know.
Well, she was extremely intelligent, and I assume I'm not as intelligent as her. But also, I think there is my method of writing is very much a process of thinking about things I don't know. So basically,
she knows there's a difference. Maybe she knows, and she wants us to know what she knows.
Well, she often knew things. She was very smart, as I said. But I just don't know things. So I'm thinking about a particular thing, and I'm trying to figure it out. And writing is a way of getting to some knowledge. And the poem is sort of byproduct of me trying to cope with this subject and trying to understand it. It might not be the most important thing for me, but this is the only thing that the reader gets. But for me, the important thing is what I have learned. And this is not about poetry only in my case. It's also about prose. So that's also the reason why each and every of my books is very different from the others in terms of subjects, in terms of language, in terms of the way the protagonists are introduced, the structure of the book. It is not that I'm bored with those things, so I pick another one. It's just I encounter different problems, and to understand them and to learn something about them, I have to write completely different books. So I guess it's also visible in my poems.
Yes. So now we'll go to politics. It's very interesting. Then I was listening yesterday to your interview with Goel Pinto, who asked you about the situation in Israel and Poland and so on. It will be interesting if you will tell us something about it, but we'll start with you recently a long poem called In Response to the Lady at a reading who asked what the job of a poet is. It was published in your new book, Bruma. The poem was written on July 2021 during the persecution of the Syrian refugees by the Polish police on the border of Belarus and Poland. I will cite a few lines in Hebrew. No, we will not read it, it's too long. I'm just citing 2 lines in Hebrew for you to... אוקיי. תשובה לגברת ששאלה בערב הספרותי מהי עבודתו של המשורר. עבודתו של המשורר היא לשבת עם בוקר ליד שולחן הכתיבה ולעלעל בחדשות רוכשות חיים של אנשים זרים. עבודתו של המשורר היא שאסור לו לפתור במילים ובמשפטים, ועליו לשאול את עצמו, כי את מי עוד יוכל לשאול, למה הכוונה במילים גופת אישה בעלת מראה לא סלאבי. הוא צריך לנסות להתאים את המילים הללו אליו עצמו, ולתהות אילו הגופה שמצאו ליד קו הגזרה הייתה גופתו שלו, האם מי שכתב את הדוח היה מתאר את מראהו כסלאבי, או אולי כלא סלאבי כלל וכלל. Maybe you will tell us few more things about the poem, but it seems that you are quite skeptical about the influence of poetry on the real world and its horrors. This is the meaning of this poem, as I understood it. You are quite ironical about the job of a poet, let's say. You just can write, but nothing more.
Yes, well, yes and no. I mean, like, I really think this is the job of a poet or any artist to interfere with the real life by taking it into yourself. And this is a very difficult job. And it costed me a lot to write this poem, and it often costs me a lot to write particular books emotionally. And this is really an emotional, deep, profound emotional work, which takes its toll. As you see, I'm 42 and I'm already gray-haired, so I see a connection here. I took it in this bracket of answering a question at a literary reading, because this is a very artificial situation of people, of readers asking you about such things, like what is the job of the poet, how do you write poems, where do you take your inspiration from? I hate those questions, but I understand that people ask them because they don't practice art. Most of people do not practice art in any form. And they are interested how it is done, and it is understandable. It's just very difficult to answer those questions because lots of things about creating is non-verbal, and it's very difficult to put in a verbal context, in a verbal form. So I took this artificial situation because it gives a distance, and I knew that I'm going to write a very personal poem because this is basically for me a poem about responsibility and also co-responsibility of a member of society, even if you are a member who totally disagrees with a particular policy. This is the government that your society, that you're a member of, elected, and this is part of your responsibility, even if you voted against. Which is something you can relate in Israel, I guess, knowing the scope of the protests that I'm observing in the media, and it is quite interesting because I've sent it to a newspaper, to Gazeta Wyborcza, which is one of the most important newspapers in Poland, and they agreed to asked me to, or offered me to publish it on the front cover of the weekend magazine, which is a very rare thing. It hardly ever happens that you would have a poem on the cover. And of course, I was very happy about it because it just makes the poem to reach people. And of course, I gave my remuneration for the printing to a particular foundation that helps the refugees at the border. And I also asked everyone to send money to this foundation, and there was a number of their accounts published together with the poem. And funnily enough, I know from people who ran the foundation that there was a lot of money that they got, and that's the money that they buy, I don't know, power banks with, blankets, torches, all the things that you need in this terrible place. This is an extremely old forest on the border of Poland and Belarus. It's a national park. This is 1,000 years old, very primitive, basic, ancient forests with marshes, and it's a terrible place to live. I mean, like, it's extremely beautiful if you're a tourist, if you are just visiting this national park, but it's terrible to survive there. And those people go there at night with those heavy backpacks with all those stuff to help the people to help them to survive the crossing of the border. And I was very happy because I was like, okay, I felt personally responsible for that as a citizen of Poland. I wrote a poem, and it actually gave actual tools to those people crossing the border. You know, it is a poem that actually changed a thing. There was an influx of money, and people went with that help, and it actually helped people. This is something that basically never happens with poetry. So I was like, okay, this time it really worked. And I was very, very happy to learn that it had a real impact on people's lives.
We'll go on to a more personal subject. In many of your poems, you deal with the experience of being homosexual. They are mostly about love and intimacy, about the difficulties of living together as a couple, not spatially a gay couple. But recently, you published a very different poem, and a very painful one, about the harsh experience of growing up as a gay boy in the homophobic atmosphere in Poland. We read this impressive poem. It's a very long poem. It's, of course, Byliśmy dzieci. Yaatzek, okay. It's not this one. It's
the long one, but I will not be reading
the very long one.
It's too long to read it in both languages, so just please, Hanna, read it only in Hebrew.
And you will read maybe a little bit, just a little bit.
Okay, well, just a start, a few lines. Na stary bilet komunikacji miejskiej znaleziony w kieszeni długo nienoszonego płaszcza w innym kraju. Byliśmy przecież dziećmi, jeździliśmy czerwonymi wagonikami, uczyliśmy się słowa pantograf, jedliśmy złe lody, które wtedy wydawały nam się dobre, o imieniu greckiej nimfy, którego wtedy nie znaliśmy, i hej, zakręt, trt, wszystko się zmieniało, krzesełka ich obiciówki w nowych, niebywałych kolorach. Byliśmy ostatecznie dziećmi i bawiły nas rzeczy pstre, zmieniały się taryfy i legitymacje, które podobno niegrzeczni chłopcy umieli oszukać, pieczętując orzełkiem już w koronie z 10-groszówki, już po denominacji. Byliśmy coraz wyżsi mimo Czernobyla, może przez brojlery z hormonami wzrostu, może po prostu przez ten nowy, lepszy świat. Byliśmy zatem wyżsi, zapryszczeni, zakompleksieni, więc w ciemnych pokojach czatów i wstydliwych zakamarkach wolnych przeglądarek, które odwiedzali podobno tylko niegrzeczni chłopcy, dowiadywaliśmy się co i jak, a czy p, bo nie dla nas sekrety z brawo bitego przez zdrową większość. And now, please, I give it to you.
I read from the book. לפני שאני מתחילה, יש כאן כמה מילות סלנג הומוסקסואלי, שהמילה גלידות שתתקלו בה זה מין אוראלי, ויש כאן אק או פס שזה אקטיבי או פסיבי בסלנג ההומוסקסואלי. השיר זה נכתב על גבי כרטיס תחבורה ציבורית ישן שנמצא בכיס מעיל, שמזמן לא נלבש בעיר אחרת. 2 years ago, I received a הרי היינו ילדים, נסענו בקרוניות אדומות, אכלנו גלידות לא טובות, שאז חשבנו שהן טובות, שנקראו בשם של נימפה יוונית, שאז לא הכרנו, והי, סיבוב, והופ הופ הופ, הכל הלך והשתנה, המושבים, צבאיו הצעקניים של הריפוד החדש. הרי בסופו של דבר היינו ילדים, ואהבנו דברים צבעוניים, השתנו דמי הנסיעה ותעודות התלמיד שילדים רעים ידעו לזייף, בהטבעת חותמת עם הנשר, שעל המטבע של 10 גרושים, הלכנו וגבענו למרות צ'רנוביל, אולי הודות לבשר הצלוי שהכין הורמון גדילה, אולי פשוט הודות לעולם החדש והטוב הזה, ובכן נעשינו גבוהים יותר ומחוטטים ומתוסבכים, ולכן התוועדנו ללמה ואיך ומה זה אק או פס, בחדרי צ'אט חשוכים ובמסתרי דפדפנים חינמים, שאותם פקדו כנראה רק ילדים רעים, כי לא לנו נועדו ההסברים בעיתוני הנוער, על סודות האומנות של הרוב הבריא, הרי היינו ילדים, ומצצנו גלידות לא טובות, שאז חשבנו שהן טובות. כתבנו מכתבי אהבה על ניירות ששלחנו לכתובות ששמותיהן המצחיקים, נראו לנו היופי בהתגלמותו. העמדנו פני חברים, העמדנו פנים ששום דבר לא מציק לנו, העמדנו פנים שהבדיחה מצחיקה, העמדנו פנים, ובסוף העמדת הפנים לא צלחה. הרי היינו ילדים, למדנו מילים כמו פנטוקואטו, הלכנו לשיעורי דת בכנסייה, השתנו דמי הנסיעה והתעודות שמקנות הנחה, ואנחנו עדיין לא שילמנו, חלק מאיתנו נראו רע ואחרים נראו טוב, נראו פשוט קול, לא ראו עליהם. ואם אק או פס, ובסוף למישהו מאיתנו נודע, ובסוף מישהו מאיתנו עזב לתמיד את הכתובת עם השם המצחיק, שפעם נראתה לנו היופי בהתגלמותו, ואחר כך כבר אף פעם לא רצינו לבקר שם. כי יש דברים שמעל לקוחותינו, כי יש דברים שמחירם רב מדי, ואחרים נסעו עוד יותר רחוק. היינו אמנם ילדים, אבל עונות הקבורה כבר היו במידות של בוגרים, אבל על זה שמענו רק שמישהו שם, אף פעם לא כאן. הסיבוב המסוכן הזה, הופ הופ הופ, עד החתונה זה יעבור, הכל השתנה, היה לנו מפתח לחדר במעונות, והיו לנו מאהבים, והייתה לנו דעה משלנו, אבל הרי היינו ילדיה של האדמה הזאת, האדמה הזאת, ולה היו תעריפים משלה, חיובים משלה, על שימוש לא סביר בגוף, ובעיקר על אהבה למישהו מאזורי כתובת הדואר עם השם המצחיק, ועל כך לא היינו רואים למחיאות כפיים, אלא רק לגיהינום עם קרוניות בוערות באדום. הרי היינו ילדים, נסענו זה אל זה ברכבת מהירה, שתמיד נראתה לנו קצת איטית, הלהיטות הזאת. לא היה לנו מקום משלנו, כי הרי היינו ילדים, למרות שהמיטות כבר היו במידות של בוגרים. חדרים חשוכים ופינות סתר בחדרים פנויים שנועדו למשהו לגמרי אחר. העמדנו פנים שליהוד הזה אין משמעות. העמדנו פנים שבכל זאת אפשר בארץ הזאת איכשהו לזייף את הייעוד, על ידי החתמה עם הנשר והצלב, ולנסוע ולטוס, בלי לשלם. ובכן, מחיאות כפיים, בראבו, הופ הופ הופ, להתעלם עם ציצנים חומדי לצון וממלשינים סקרנים, עם התעודה שמוצאים מהכיס ביד מזיעה, עם תעריפי החיובים על שימוש לא סביר במי שאנו, בנו עצמנו. הרי היינו ילדים, ואם האמנו במשהו, הייתה זו רק אמונה נאיבית שבסוף יצליח לנו. הרי היינו ילדים, אבל אף אחד לא רצה לדעת מה היינו, באיזה כלי תחבורה רצינו לנסוע, ועם מי ללכת. הרי היינו ילדים, וכולם רצו לדעת מה אנחנו ובאיזה תחבורה רצינו לנסוע, ועם מי אנחנו רוצים ללכת, ובעצם לאיזו מטרה, ובעצם מהו בדיוק ייעודם של החדרים הפנויים, ובעצם מהו מקור הכתמים האלה של הריפוד הצעקני, אלא שהכתמים אכן היו בעצם ממקור חייתי וייעוד חייתי, ולא היה לנו ייעוד אחר, אלא רק של חיות בחדרוני סתר חשוכים, ששום קרוניות אדומות לא נוסעות עליהם, למרות שמוצצים שם גלידות שנראו לנו טובות, אבל היו רעות מאוד, הרוע בהתגלמותו. הרי היינו ילדים, אבל בסופו של דבר יכולנו לנסוע לחתונה, בסופו של דבר איש לא יתגעגע אליכם נימפות יווניות. הרי בסופו של דבר תעשו מה שאתם רוצים, בסופו של דבר צלב עם אחרי הפיחות ונשר עם כתר, ושיהיה לכם לבריאות, והופ הופ הופ, זה לא היה כל כך קשה, זה היה נורא קשה. התעודה שנשלפה מהכיס ביד מזיעה, שבאנו מהארץ ההיא, הארץ שקרובה לצ'רנוביל ולפנטוקרטור, שכן לחלקנו היה מראה לא טוב, לחלקנו היו כוונות לא טובות, חלקנו נועדו לגורל לא טוב, היינו ילדים רעים בעלי ייעוד לא ראוי. הרי היינו ילדים, אבל הגורל תלוי על חוט השערה של הריפוד הצעקני שבקרוניות בצבע האדום לבן, ובארצנו ילדים רעים אחרים שינו בארצנו את התעריפים, שינו את עלות החיובים, ועל כך הודיעו לנו במייל אישי, השתנו חוקי המשחק, עקרונות הסטטוס קוו, אורך המיטות שלנו השתנה, וגם מידות ארונות הקבורה המיועדים לנו, הרי היינו כבר מבוגרים. הרי היינו ילדים, ובארץ האחרת לבשנו מעיל שכבר מזמן לא נלבש. הכנסנו יד לכיס, ומצאנו שם כרטיס בעצם חסר חשיבות. כאילו לכל זה לא הייתה חשיבות. כאילו לא הייתה חשיבות לזה, שהרי היינו ילדים. So what do you say about this poem? About this long poem? First while to hear it, to listen to all this long poem.
I like hearing it in Hebrew very much. I mean, like I like hearing my poems in Hebrew very much in general because they sound nice. They also sound better. Because it's in spite of this deep there is such a nice melody in those, but maybe it's just your translations that they have this beautiful melody. This is a poem that is really I think I wouldn't have written it if I did not leave Poland.
That's what I wanted to ask you. How it happened that you wrote it in this stage of your life? Suddenly, like it burst from you.
Yes, and I think it's a distance, and it's also the question of pandemic and being in a different city in a different country for a long time. I did not move in any very dramatic way. I received a very nice artist residency in Berlin, DAAD. This is a very famous art residency that you come here for a year, you get a beautiful apartment, you get money every month. It's a very comfortable way of emigrating. And then we just decided with my husband that we are going to remain at least for the time being, because exactly when we were in Berlin for the scholarship, we had a presidential election in Poland, and LGBT people were one of the main subjects of the campaign. And
the new Jewish people, the new Jews.
Sorry?
The new Jews is a...
Yes, the new Jews, yes. You can run out of Jews, but you will never run out of gays. So it's useful. And it grew so homophobic. Lots of our friends were attacked or this way or another, physically, verbally, and we just said, okay, we don't want to go back home, at least now. But somehow being here in Berlin allowed me to look at things with a certain distance, and I think I just needed that to write this kind of poem, to have this feeling that my life is in a completely different way and place than it used to be. It's not only the question of age. Of course, I'm 40, not 17 or whatever, but I needed a sense of being in a different place, I guess, to write it. And a little bit later, I was asked by a Polish magazine to write a text about growing up as a gay person in Poland. I mean, like to write something about being gay in Poland. It was not necessarily about growing up. They wanted something from the sort of history of LGBT people in Poland. And as I'm a sort of specialist in 1930s crimes, I thought I would write something about how it looked like in the magazines dealing with crimes in 1920s and 30s. But there was not much of interesting things there. And I thought, okay, I'm so old now that I can actually write about me growing up, and it's already history. Because I realized, because I always thought, I'm not going to write about it because everyone has this experience in Poland. Every LGBT person has this experience of growing up in Poland in 90s or earlier. There is nothing special in that. And then I realized that there is a completely new generation that has a completely different experience than we did, or maybe not completely, but largely different. And I wrote that text for this magazine. This text is magazine. I mean, not the poem. I wrote a different text.
Yeah. I think I read it.
But somehow I think they correspond together. This poem and that text that I wrote for Dwutygodnik, the magazine, and yes, and I think it's somehow, you know, discovering my own experience as a new, sort of special one. Although I thought it's pretty obvious and there's nothing interesting in it. Because I'm not a gay writer. I mean, I'm of course gay and I'm a writer, but I don't consider myself as a gay writer like, I don't know, Alan Hollinghurst or Edmund White. So the main focus of their writing, of the great writing, is being gay and the particularities of being a gay man mostly. Whereas it is not my main subject. I sometimes write texts about that, but this is not my main subject. And as you said, if I write about love or about being in a relationship, it is mostly not limited to being gay. It's just a general thing. However, this poem is actually, as you said, in a way quite peculiar and unusual, and there are not that many poems like that. And it's not that I don't find it interesting, you know. I just don't know how to write about it. So
I felt as if, you know, the anger that you all your life, maybe it was inside you and you didn't show it. It burst.
Definitely.
It's very, it's not typical to you at all, this tone.
I mean, it was an important experience because, as with the previous poem that you mentioned, there are two very large poems. They're sort of poured out of me, like in a whole. It's not that there are large poems, and normally I would work on them for a very long period of time, whereas they just sort of, they were all formed there in the back of my head. It was just another, you know, to push it, and it just lasted a day or two.
I had this feeling when I translated them that they are, you know, like, and they are without, to say it, simonei pisuk, like a stream of consciousness written without...
Stream of consciousness.
Yeah.
Yes.
Both of them, I felt that they come from the same source, they have the same...
Yes, because they have a similar engine. So they work on repeating the same words or phrases, but giving them different meanings, which is actually extremely difficult to translate, especially this gay poem. I know, but I know because I very often use the same words in their different meanings.
It was not very difficult, I should say. No? No.
Maybe...
I told you no without the marks, but when I recognized, you know, this as if the sentences, and no, it was not, you know, I went with your voice and it was natural to me.
But I also learned that sometimes Polish and Hebrew have similar connections between the words that went to modern Hebrew from Yiddish. So there is like a connection, and sometimes you have the same proverbs or sayings that are in Polish and in Hebrew, and they somehow were connected by Yiddish this way or another.
Maybe I write about it sometimes because all the time I find this, discover this.
And even if it's not direct, there is, for instance, a similar sense of irony or puns between the Jewish languages and Polish. And I think it's helpful in translating this kind of poems in which, you know, words come in different meaning every time, because apparently they had the same extra meanings in Polish, in Hebrew, if you found it easy to translate. Because my English translator she liked the poem, but she said it was extremely difficult work.
We are closing to the end of the event, so maybe a poem or two for...
Yeah, we'll make it faster now. I wanted to ask you about the Jewish, the place of the Jewish theme in your work, so we do it just a moment. So yes, yes, that you are concerned in quite many of your poems with the Holocaust and the Polish Jewry also. Also, you initiated the restoration of the Jewish cemetery in Warsaw, and you have translated Bialik's Yiddish poetry in cooperation with Marzena Zabanowska. We'll read the poem June, July, which is about the last moments of the Jewish-Polish famous author and painter Bruno Schulz, who was shot by a Gestapo officer on 1942. The murder took place on the streets of his hometown, Drohobych. June, July, we'll read it. No, it's not this. Juni, Yuli? No.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
Should I read too?
Yes, of course.
Okay. Czerwiec, lipiec. Rysunek piórkiem, arkusz papieru, ołówek. Powóz lakierowany na czarno, w nim lalki. U ich pantofli zgięty we czworo półgłówek bije niskie pokłony. Upał. Zapach kalki i ługowanych podłóg. Mucha, gdzieś zamknięta między dwiema szybami, nie przerywa walki ze stwardniałym w dwie tafle powietrzem. Tuż zmięta kartka druga, tuchota. Po dziedzińcu gonią chłopcy w szkolnych mundurkach, w rowach pachnie mięta i zgnilizna. Niedługo się zacznie. Kolonie, dzikość letnich ogrodów, sukienki dziewczynek, odsłonięte kolana, kiwające dłonie. Przysnął na chwilę. Widzi miasto w czerni, rynek, krew na chodnikach, ogień, pocisk w czaszce ludzi. Budzi się, lecz nie w strachu. Zatem odpoczynek, myśli. Coś go ukoi, wreszcie go wystudzi. Ale i ten sen znika, jest ogień i wrzask. Pocisk już wyszedł z lufy i znowu się budzi. Dalej jest tusz i grafit, pod nimi blask.
טוב, אני אקרא את זה בעברית. יוני-יולי, רישום דיו, גיליון נייר עיפרון, כרכרה בלקה שחורה, בתוכה בובות למרגלותיהם על חונו, מוקיון משתחווה עמוקות. חום מצמית, ריח קרבון ורצפות ממרקות. זבוב כלוא אי שם בין שתי שמשות, נאבק על חייו, באוויר הדחוס בין שני הלוחות. ריח דיו, גיליון מעוך ועוד אחד, מחניק. נערים בתלבושת בית ספר מתרוצצים בחצר, בתעלות עומד ריח מנטול וריקבון. עוד מעט זה יתחיל, חופשת הקיץ, פיראות פריחת הגנים, שמלות קלות, ברכיים גלויות, נפנוף ידי נערות. לרגע קט התנמנם, והוא רואה את העיר בשחור, את כיכר השוק, דם על המדרכות, אש, כדור אל הגולגולת, אנשים. הוא מתעורר, אך אינו חרד, אזי את מנוחה הוא חושב. סוף סוף בא עליו איזה רוגע, גופו שוב אינו בוער, אבל גם החלום הזה נגוז. מסביב אש וצרחות, הכדור משתחרר מהקנה, ושוב הוא ער, ועדיין ריח דיו ועופרת, ומתחת בוקעים נגוהות. טוב, אני רואה שאם זמננו כל כך קצר, אז כדאי שנקרא עוד איזה שיר או שניים קצרים?
No, maybe just we'll end with this beautiful poem maybe a word or two from each of you to the end of the event.
We'll read.
No, not reading another poem, but maybe just something from you, Jacek and Hanna, to the audience.
Okay, I'm extremely happy to be here with you. Really, it's a pleasure because, you know, poetry gets translated very rarely, and usually when you are very old or already dead. So it's such a privilege to have a book translated when you are not dead already.
Israel of all countries.
In Israel of all countries. It's a really pleasure because I'm really happy that I got a new readership in Israel, and I know that there were some reviews and they were really, you know, very touching for me. So I'm very happy, and I'm very grateful to Hanna who translated that book. She's
translated it perfectly. It's beautiful.
She's a great ambassador of my poetry, and I'm very happy about it. Thank you so much.
So we're not doing another poem? We don't have the time at all?
No, we don't have the time, and the poems need their time. They're long and beautiful, and Jacek, you read it like a praying. It's so musical. The Polish, it's a musical language. It was amazing.
I hope you heard. You listened to the music of all those poems that we read. The music is so prominent aspect of this poetry.
Yes.
I hope you heard it.
I agree. So thank you, Hanna and Jacek, for the lovely event, for your beautiful dynamic and poetry and translations. Thanks to all of our viewers. I invite you to join us in about a half hour for the last event of this evening. It will be our pleasure to host the translator, Merav Pitun, to hear about her translations of American nowadays poetry, and read with her from them. See you soon.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.
It was amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
רוצה טרם? יכול להספיק? Thank you. אז יאללה בוא עכשיו.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jacek. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Thank you so much. Good night.
Goodbye.
Good night.